late March heat across the Great Basin area and into central California over the next few days. Heavy rainfall associated with this vigorous area of low pressure has brought some flooding to Paraguay. Strong gale force winds will also affect northeastern Argentina as the system pulls away into the Atlantic over the weekend. This area of low pressure bringing further wet weather with some flooding downpours for southern and eastern Spain. A gradual improvement across the southeast of Europe, Greece, the islands, seeing temperatures getting closer to the seasonal norm. But high pressure dominates the rest of northern and central Europe. Heavy rainfall likely across the southeast of Africa, parts of Madagascar too, though Cape Town staying dry and sunny to end the week. Much of the Middle East will be dry and sunny, but it's cooler, showery, quite windy across the Levant into Iraq and the Caucasus. Some snow here over the higher ground for Friday and into the start of the weekend. A lot of dry and sunny and hot weather for South Asia, particularly central northern India. But again, we see the threat of showers and storms breaking out across southern and western India and into Sri Lanka. Some of them will be quite intense. This vigorous area of low pressure will bring some wet weather to southern and eastern China on Friday. Pretty strong winds as well coming up from the south. The wet windy weather will sweep into the Korean Peninsula, southern Japan for the start of the weekend. Finally, for Australia, well, it's dry, sunny and hot across the west. Some very unwelcome rainfall likely across New South Wales, southern Queensland Friday into the weekend. And slowly we see that area of low pressure pull away from New Zealand's North Island. So here it's a gradual improvement this weekend.
Alone, we break the rules. Together, we make the rules. Alone, they say we are feisty. Together, we are fearless. Shout alone, they call us hysterical. Shout together, we can be historical. This is a new perspective, inclusive, not selective. One will sacrifice, we all make a gain. One wins, we all take the prize. One stands, we all rise. 100 Women, a series of inspiring and challenging stories across the BBC.
But we hope and pray that finally after 40 years, the people of Afghanistan will have peace and stability.
My view of feminism is still really the same, which is that I think feminism is fundamentally a justice movement.
Africa will always remain important for me, and so I will continue doing what I do.
I could not have had a career as a gay man.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
This is BBC News. Welcome if you're watching here in the UK or around the globe. I'm Yalda Hakim. Our top stories. NATO leaders meeting in Brussels pledge more military aid to Ukraine and strengthen their presence in Eastern Europe.
Allies are also equipping Ukraine with significant military supplies, including anti-tank and air defense systems and drones, which are proving highly effective.
Ukrainian military says it's destroyed a Russian landing ship in the port of Berdyansk, west of the besieged city of Mariupol. Calls for the UN to do more after the Taliban backtracked on its commitment to reopen schools for all girls, leaving students devastated. The boss of P&O Ferries has admitted that sacking 800 workers without consulting unions broke the law.
I completely hold our hands up, my hands up, our hands up, that we did choose not to consult.
That's quite amazing, isn't it? You're coming to this parliament and putting your hands up and saying you willfully chose to break the law.
And the British Chancellor defends his spring spending statement, saying he's taken action to support those affected by the rising cost of living. But one think tank says more than 1 million people will now be pushed into poverty from April. Welcome back. It's 1 month since Russia invaded Ukraine and began this devastating war, a war that is certainly not going as President Putin had hoped or planned. There are estimates that some 10,000 Russian troops have died, with between 30 and 40,000 injured. Western intelligence agencies suggest Russian troops are increasingly demoralized and some of them even risk being encircled near the capital Kiev, where Ukrainian forces have been counterattacking. NATO leaders are meeting in Brussels, where they have pledged more military aid to Ukraine, including the means to help the country defend itself against biological, chemical or nuclear attacks, as well as cyber warfare. More on that shortly, but first, James Waterhouse has this report from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev.
At 5 in the morning on the 24th of February, this city woke up to the unthinkable. After months of gathering his troops on Ukraine's borders and the endless speculation over what he was planning, Vladimir Putin launched his invasion.
I have decided to conduct a special military operation. Its aim is to protect people who have been subjected to tortures and genocide from the Kiev regime for 8 years. Whoever tries to interfere with us or threaten our country should know that Russia's response will be immediate and lead to such consequences that have never been experienced in history.
There were the thuds of airstrikes, police on megaphones telling people to get to safety. There were the sounds of jets passing above the clouds, queues outside cash points, and thousands of cars filled the roads out of the city. Many people were afraid, and most couldn't believe what was happening. Many predicted Kiev would fall quickly. President Zelensky would be removed and Russia could achieve its goal. That goal hasn't yet been achieved and still isn't clear. President Zelensky is still in power and, in a rare use of English, called for people to protest around the world.
Come with Ukrainian symbols to support Ukraine, to support freedom, to support life. Come to your squares, your streets, make yourselves visible and heard.
The Russian forces on the outskirts of the city continue to be plagued by supply and morale issues, according to the UK's Ministry of Defence. In towns like Irpin and Bucha, where there's been intense fighting, Ukrainian troops could even surround them, it's thought. Kiev, like so many other European cities, was full of choice, life and noise. The fast-moving shadow of this war has left it feeling quiet and hollow. You can see it, but no longer feel it.
We are waiting for the victory. We are waiting for peace in our Ukraine.
But right now it's on daily basis. Fear of, bullets, fear of bombs.
Bombs are continuing to fall on other surrounded Ukrainian cities like Chernihiv and Mariupol in the southeast, where the Russians have made the most gains. They've also suffered big losses. NATO thinks between 7,000 and 14,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. As Vladimir Putin continues to be frustrated, the question is how many more lives will be lost or destroyed. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kiev.
Okay, let's just see some pictures now of that Russian ship burning in Berdyansk. Let's just show you those. It's being reported the landing ship is anchored off the occupied port west of the besieged city of Mariupol. It's understood a massive explosion was seen above the ship. There are unverified reports of another 2 ships ablaze. Taking the port city of Mariupol is a key part of Russia's effort to create a land corridor linking the occupied territories of Crimea and the Donbass. The corridor would establish a supply line to Russian forces on the southern flank. Now, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says leaders have pledged more to support Ukraine. Speaking after today's emergency summit, he confirmed that the alliance would also do more to help the country defend itself against biological, chemical or nuclear attacks, as well as cyber warfare.
On land, we will have substantially more forces in the eastern part of the alliance at higher readiness, with more pre-positioned equipment and supplies. In the air, we will deploy more jets and strengthen our integrated air and missile defense. At sea, we will have carrier strike groups, submarines, and significant numbers of combat ships on a persistent basis. We will also strengthen our cyber defenses and enhance our exercises, focusing on collective defense and interoperability. I expect we will decide on the details at our next summit in Madrid in June. Today, Allied leaders also agreed to provide further support to Ukraine, helping to uphold their fundamental right to self-defense. Allies are also equipping Ukraine with significant military supplies, including anti-tank and air defense systems and drones, which are proving highly effective, as well as substantial financial and humanitarian aid.
Jens Stoltenberg there. Well, when answering a question on how serious the threat of chemical, radiological and nuclear threats could be, Mr. Stoltenberg said such actions would totally change the nature of the conflict.
We are concerned, partly because we see the rhetoric and we see that Russia is trying to create some kind of pretext accusing Ukraine, United States, NATO allies for preparing to use chemical and biological weapons. And we have seen before that this way of accusing others is actually a way to create a pretext for do the same themselves. And of course, the accusations against Ukraine and NATO allies are absolutely false. Any use of chemical weapons will totally change the nature of the conflict. It will be a blatant violation of international law, and it will have widespread consequences and, of course, be extremely dangerous.
NATO Secretary-General there. Well, let's go straight to our Jessica Parker, who joins me from Brussels. And Jessica, clearly his greatest concern in that press conference and in general for all these NATO leaders is chemical, biological warfare.
Hi, MCL.
Can you hear me, Jessica? No, we have lost Jessica Parker in Brussels, but we will go back to her as soon as we get it. So here we are 1 month into this war with the Russian advance stalled and thousands of its troops dead. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, are counterattacking. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner has this assessment of the Russian military campaign and the problems its troops have encountered.
So just why has it gone so badly for Russia in these first few weeks of the war? Well, there are a number of reasons. There is the strength of Ukrainian resistance. Most of the population has rallied around their government. The troops are using Western-supplied weapons like Javelin and Stinger missiles. And when it comes to getting inside big cities, Russia doesn't have enough troops to take on the defenders in most cases. Here's their charismatic president, Volodymyr Zelensky, a one-time comic actor who's rallied the nation, refusing to leave the capital, even though there's a bounty on his head. Then there's poor Russian tactics. Russian commanders on the ground have largely failed to take full advantage of all the tools at their disposal. Things like armoured vehicles, artillery, rocket launchers, helicopters, all of which, when combined with infantry, can have a massive effect, but which the Russians have failed to master. The Russian Air Force is 15 times bigger than Ukraine's, yet they've failed to achieve supremacy in the skies. And finally, there's poor Russian logistics and communications. Russian soldiers have not always maintained their vehicles properly, meaning that many of them are breaking down. And when it comes to radios, a lot of them don't work, forcing them to use mobile phones, which can easily be intercepted by the Ukrainians. Many of the Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine thought they were just going on exercise, like this one in Belarus. That didn't give them enough time to prepare for battle.
Exercises never prepare troops properly for combat, so that they were not combat ready. And that puts real strain on the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants and the corporals, to get things ready in time, make sure the troops do their job properly. And in the Russian army, the sergeants and the corporals are renowned for their inefficiency, their corruption, and the bad relationships they have with the soldiers. So everything that could go wrong, more or less did go wrong.
And today, a small victory for Ukraine on the Sea of Azov. Its forces claim to have destroyed a Russian amphibious landing ship. Russia still has plenty more ships, but the fact Ukrainians are still fighting back 1 month on shows Russia has grossly underestimated them. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
OK, let's go back to our Jessica Parker, and I think we've got you this time, Jess. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
We were just hearing from Jens Stoltenberg, who was expressing his concern about chemical and biological warfare, clearly top of the agenda there for NATO leaders.
Yeah, very much so, and I think it will be something that will be discussed here as well at the European Council of EU leaders, and of course President Biden, the US president, is expected to join that European Council. We even think he's going to walk up this red carpet here. They've just recently put some US flags next to some European Union flags, and I think certainly in terms of concerns about an escalation in the type of warfare, there are warnings of consequences should something like that occur. And in terms of the European Union, of course, it's not a military alliance, it is largely an economic alliance. So the discussion as to what could happen as a consequence would, of course, be potentially more sanctions. But to be honest with you, already some countries in the EU want more sanctions now. Latvia's Prime Minister has just arrived for this summit, and he is saying that tonight he will push for a discussion on energy sanctions, particularly oil and coal. So that's oil and coal imports from Russia, because there is a particular concern amongst particularly Poland, Baltic states, Eastern Central European countries in the EU that Europe is sending money to Russia to pay for these energy imports, and that money is being used to fund President Putin's war. But there are countries, notably Germany, who are really not keen on any kind of overnight energy embargo.
Yeah, and just I suppose in many ways, many of these European NATO leaders are feeling the pressure from President Zelensky as well, who night and day is addressing their parliaments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the diplomatic efforts of President Zelensky, he has been beaming in via video link to the European Parliament, the UK Parliament, the G7 today, NATO today. He'll do it again tonight, this afternoon, for the European Council as well, where, of course, he always calls for more support, things like a no-fly zone, which, of course, NATO is saying it won't do, but also just always pressing for more sanctions and giving these assessments of what's happening on the ground, clearly very disturbing, upsetting, horrific developments in particular places like Mariupol. So I think there is a lot of pressure on leaders to look at what more they can do. And I think it'll be interesting tonight to see whether the presence of President Biden, who's only here for a couple of hours, whether his presence does anything to galvanise the EU to go further in terms of sanctions, because there are member states who use this phrase sanctions fatigue. They think that after 4 rounds of sanctions, which are unprecedented in terms of the EU, not just in terms of what they were, but how fast they were passed as well, but some member states think sanctions fatigue is setting in, and that it is time to do more. So I think that'll certainly be part of the discussions today.
Yeah, and I suppose in many ways, President Biden has sort of talked about the unity within NATO. They want to show that there is something that will come out of this summit as well, because we don't often see summits like these, frankly. I mean, Jess, I'm also trying to hang on to you as long as possible, because I want to see President Biden walk past you, just behind you.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't know exactly when that might happen, but you never know. But yeah, I mean, look, I think overall, take a step back, there has been a lot of unity in the West, and today is to some extent symbolic of that. President Biden crossing the Atlantic for the first time since Russia invaded Ukraine to show solidarity with the West, with Europe, as a war takes place on European soil. But I think there are some serious political purposes as well, defence spending really being one of them. As I say, the EU is not a military alliance, but it is actively talking about doing more around defence, working more closely together, spending more on defence. We've seen already a commitment from Germany to spend more on defence, matching NATO targets, 2% of GDP. And I think the US has long wanted to see other NATO members spend more on defence, and Russia's invasion has brought that issue to the fore and has actually pushed some countries in that direction. So while I think it's true to say that EU countries, in terms of their unity, has frayed a bit in terms of what to do next on sanctions, overall, actually, Russia's invasion of Ukraine does appear to have breathed new life into NATO and seen unprecedented Western unity in the EU, in NATO. And of course, there's been a G7 summit as well today, 3 summits in one day. And this one, of course, goes on into tomorrow.
Okay, Jessica, thanks so much for that update. No doubt at some point he will walk there behind you. Now, many reservists and ordinary citizens have taken up arms to defend their country against the Russian invaders. Earlier, my colleague Ben Brown spoke to Taras Ishik, who has just joined up the territorial defence forces of the Ukrainian armed forces. Have a listen.
28 days ago, we were like regular engineers, managers. As for me, I'm marketing manager. And today we all are the soldiers for Ukrainian army, and we are staying front line of this really crazy war for all the civilized world.
And at the moment, you and your fellow reservists, soldiers, you're training hard, aren't you, for what you fear may be to come?
Actually, for all of this day, we are training very actively. It's a lot of trainings like tactical medicine, tactic shooting, working in a small units, and it's really a lot of trainings which are now in the territorial defense forces. Also, we have a lot of instructors who also have NATO diplomas, and they are instructed in territorial defense forces. Yeah.
Do you think this is a war you can win, that Ukraine can win? Because the Russian armed forces, they are enormous, we know that, and they're very, very powerful.
Actually, we will win in this war, especially with support of Western countries, because first of all, we need to close our sky, and then we will finish this war on the land. But we need more anti-aircraft systems, we need more weapons, we need more support from Western countries, and it's very important for us to defend all the civilized world against Russia, which don't have any moral rules in this war.
It is 1 month since the Russian invasion. Is this a war that you think is going to go on for many, many more months?
Actually, we don't know how much time will be this war, but I'm sure that we will win in this war, actually, and we do all the best what we can to do. And actually, I'm sure that we will finish this war on the Ukrainian-Russian border. We will return the Crimea and all of our occupied territories.
You think you can win? What about, I mean, do you feel fear? If you are sent to the front line to fight the Russians, does that make you nervous? Does that make you scared?
All of our soldiers are full of fury now because, as I said, the Russians don't have any moral rules. They kill thousand civilians, children, old people, and it's very disgusting in this crazy war. So we are very motivated to finish this war and to win in this war, because we are know for what we fight, and they don't know for what them fight. So it's big difference.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it, about motivation, because the Russian forces often conscripts, aren't they? Some of them apparently thought they were still on exercise when they first came into Ukraine, but you are defending your homeland. You're defending your towns and villages and cities.
Actually, all of our soldiers are motivated, first of all, to defend our regions, our families, our homes, as you said. And it's a high motivation for us, and all of our soldiers are motivated to win in this war and to end this war and to return of our territory. So it's very important to every person in our territorial defense forces.
That was my colleague Ben Brown speaking there to Taras Ishik in Lviv in western Ukraine. Now to other news today. And young girls in Afghanistan are facing an uncertain future as the Taliban broke its promise to finally allow high school girls to go back to school. Yesterday, instead, they were turned away from the gates they used to walk through. The Taliban said a decision still has to be made on the uniforms the girls can wear. Well, the UN has urged the Taliban to reopen schools immediately. Here is the spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres.
The de facto authorities' failure to reopen school for girls above the 6th grade, despite repeated commitments, is a profound disappointment and deeply damaging for Afghanistan. The Secretary-General says that denial of education not only violates the equal rights of women and girls to education, it also jeopardizes the country's future in view of the tremendous contributions by Afghan women and girls. The Secretary-General urges the Taliban de facto authorities to open schools for all students without delay.
Spokesperson for Antonio Guterres there. Well, earlier I spoke to Adela Raz, the former Afghan ambassador to the US, up close up until the closure of the Afghan embassy a week ago. She was appointed by the former Ghani government, but not recognized by the Taliban. She said the UN condemning the Taliban's decision is not enough. Have a listen.
I think the UN needs to be more stronger and take more assertive action because, as you said rightly, there was a statement out by the Secretary General earlier and it was welcome, but at this stage, which somehow it was expected probably for a lot of Afghan and especially Afghan women that Taliban may not deliver on what they had promised, there has to be more stronger action by the United Nations. It's an independent entity. It's an entity in the ground right now with the largest footprint in the biggest development project that it's bringing to Afghanistan. So there is something that they can definitely leverage with Taliban, and simply making a statement and condemning it will not bring the results that many Afghan women look up to, especially to the United Nations.
So what are the practical things that they can do? As you say, they have the biggest footprint on the ground, but given there is a humanitarian crisis in the country, what can the UN do to hold the Taliban accountable?
Sure. Look, the UN, their engagements right now they have on the humanitarian side and on the political side as well. Right now they have a political mission in the ground. On the humanitarian side, I think there is no question and no doubt that they must be engaged. They must deliver the humanitarian aid that's needed in Afghanistan. On the political front, where their office is in the ground, they have to be more vocal. They have to be more engaged in a way that the communication must be very clear to Taliban, because Taliban is looking forward to have a recognition by the international community. And if they are not delivering on the basic rights of Afghan women, the basic rights of women in Islam, which is education, and they are banning women to have access to schools, that's not going to take them any closer to any type of recognition they hope and they expect to see.
Are you disappointed in the response of the international community, given they spent billions supporting, funding, backing Afghan women and girls when they entered the country in 2001? You yourself are a product of that. You lived your childhood under the Taliban, but you went on to be educated in American universities in Afghanistan. You went on to be the UN ambassador to Afghanistan, the US ambassador to Afghanistan. I mean, you are the quintessential example of the gains of the last 2 decades.
Yes, and not only me, Yaldajan. There are so many Afghan women that truly made tremendous progress in their lives. They were contributors to the new Afghanistan, to the new society, and the 20 years truly brought a change in the country. And I think that's the actual change we usually can measure, which is the lives of people themselves, and the access and the type of education we all received. And it's true, 25 years ago, I was in the country and I was banned from going to school for 5 years. And I remember every single day waking up and hoping that a miracle happens and I would be able to go to school, and that miracle never happened. For 5 years I stayed at home. And the response from the international community, I think, and it's not only to me, to many Afghan women, we hope to see more from the international community. We have always said it that today the women of Afghanistan are definitely can play a role as their partners in the international arena. But where we have a right now in the country, half of population are women, and we were those forefront fighters with our international partners. And today what has happened, we need to see more from our allies and friends and partners which invested in the country.
Now, the chief executive of P&O Ferries has admitted that the decision to sack 800 workers without consulting unions broke the law. Peter Hebelwaite said he chose not to consult because he didn't believe there was any other way to do it. He also said he would make the same decision again because the business as it wasn't viable, and now it is. Speaking to a committee of MPs in the UK, Mr Hebelwaite said the move was the only way to save the company. Here's our business correspondent Theo Leggett.
Arriving to face MPs, the boss of P&O, a week after making 800 workers redundant without notice. Peter Hebblethwaite did not get an easy ride. The chair of the Joint Transport and Business Committee set the tone from the outset.
Are you in this mess because you don't know what you're doing, or are you just a shameless criminal?
No answer there, but the P&O boss did admit breaking the law by not consulting with unions.
There's absolutely no doubt that we were required to consult with the unions. We chose not to do that because we believe...
You chose to break the law?
Because we chose not to consult, and we will will compensate everybody in full for that.
The ferry crews were sacked so they could be replaced with cheaper agency workers.
The average hourly rate of pay is £5.50.
That's below the national minimum wage of this country. How do you reconcile that?
Where we are governed by national minimum wage, we will absolutely pay national minimum wage. This is an international seafaring model that is consistent with models throughout the globe and our competitors.
But unions had already told MPs what they thought the company was trying to do.
That's what P&O are aiming to achieve, to kill our merchant marine and to kill our employment laws. And something's got to be done about it today. The Prime Minister said he's going to prosecute. This government has got to intervene now, impound these ships and get our people back to work.
Meanwhile, P&O's ferries stand idle. Services on most routes are still suspended as the new crews are trained up. Eventually, they'll sail again. But the political storm stirred up by P&O's actions shows no sign of dying down. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
Now, the British Chancellor Rishi Sunak has defended the measures he set out yesterday to help people with the rising cost of living. Critics say he hasn't done enough, with one think tank warning that 1.3 million people will fall below the poverty line from April. The main opposition party, Labour, has called the policies a disaster for working families. Here's our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
The view from Downing Street the morning after, the day before. Rishi Sunak had a spring in his step yesterday when he took 5p a litre off fuel duty, and he was pumped when he announced a pre-election income tax cut. But with living standards set to fall further than in any year since the 1950s, today he faced accusations that he hadn't grasped the scale of the cost of living crisis. But he argued it helped millions of people by blunting the impact of his national insurance rise.
Raising national insurance thresholds, which is a tax cut for £330 for up to 30 million workers, and then getting around to cutting income tax. Those are all tax-cutting measures. We also cut tax for businesses to make it cheaper for them to employ staff. It's the hardest part about this job, not being able to do everything that people would like you to do. But I can't make every problem go away, but where we can make a difference, we want to, and that's what yesterday was about.
But even some newspapers, which are usually supportive of the Conservatives, are pressing the Chancellor to do more, as are some of his own MPs.
Many of my constituents in South Dorset are impoverished already. We have deep pockets of deprivation and poverty, and I fear that despite the generous moves by the Chancellor and the tinkering that he's done, haven't gone far enough.
The Treasury would point out that many factors pushing up prices globally are beyond its control, but the opposition's accusing the Chancellor of making the wrong political choices. There's now a big political dividing line between the government and the opposition. They're claiming that the Chancellor simply isn't doing enough to help consumers and is letting big corporations off the hook. Now, next year, Rishi Sunak does intend to increase taxes on big business. But Labour and Liberal Democrats say what's needed is action now to tackle the profits of the big energy companies.
What I would have done yesterday as Chancellor would have been to introduce a windfall tax on the big profits being made by North Sea oil and gas companies at the moment.
Overall, we want a fairer tax system, don't we? We want to tax those people who've got these huge profits in the oil and gas companies and take taxes down for struggling families.
The Treasury has rejected that approach, arguing it would reduce much-needed investment in energy production. But even some of Rishi Sunak's own MPs are saying privately he'll have to expend more economic and political energy himself to tackle the current crisis. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
OK, we'll be going back to all the latest news in a moment, but let's go and get all the latest sports news now. And Louisa joins us. Louisa.
Thanks, Yalda. Yes, a host of nations around the world are hoping to take a step towards the World Cup finals in Qatar. Wales's Gareth Bale has declared himself fit for the playoff semi-final with Austria later in their Path A group. Bale dropped out of the Real Madrid squad for Sunday's El Clasico against Barcelona with what was described as a little niggle. Wales haven't qualified for a World Cup since 1958, and Bale is determined to change that.
No, it's something that I would love to achieve for myself, for my country, for the fans of Wales. We deserve to kind of be in the World Cup. It's been a long time, so but no, it won't be a regret, but it'll be a regret if we don't give it 100%. So the main thing for us is we go out on the pitch, all of us give 100%. We don't leave anything left in the tank, and yeah, I think once you've done that, there's never going to be any regrets, regardless of the result.
European champions Italy are one of the biggest teams in action. They face North Macedonia in their playoff semi-final in Palermo later. The Italians have some injury problems though and are missing at least 3 of their starting back 4. They've had a difficult time in World Cups in recent years. Italy were knocked out in the group stage both in 2010 and 2014 and failed to qualify for Russia in 2018. So the winners of Italy v North Macedonia will earn a playoff final against Portugal or Turkey. Portugal have some injuries. They've been without their 2 first-choice centre-backs. Ruben Diaz has a hamstring problem, while Pepe is missing after testing positive for COVID. It's unclear if he could return for next week's playoff final if Portugal get past Turkey. So here are all the European playoffs later. In Path B, Sweden play the Czech Republic. The resurgence of England's women at the Cricket World Cup has taken them to the verge of the semi-finals after an outstanding 9-wicket win over Pakistan. They made a dreadful start to the tournament, but Catherine Brunt was back in form, taking 3 wickets as Pakistan were swept aside for 105 and England raced to their target inside just 20 overs. Danny Wyatt with an impressive 76 not out. That moves the defending champions into the top 4 of the round-robin group. They'll make the semis if they avoid defeat to Bangladesh on Sunday. England's men are also in action. It's day 1 of the 3rd and final test against the West Indies in Grenada. And it's all to play for as the first 2 tests ended in a draw. So whoever wins this test wins the series. West Indies won the toss and put England into bat. That is looking like to have been a good decision as Zach Crawley was out for just 7 runs and captain Joe Root followed shortly afterwards. He was out for a duck. England are 35 for 2. Now, after Ashley Barty stunned the tennis world by announcing her retirement at the age of 25, she's been talking about her decision overnight. The Wimbledon and Australian Open champion has set a date for her wedding. She's not ruled out competing in golf or Aussie rules football, but her main focus, she says, is giving something back to tennis, especially when it comes to encouraging young Indigenous Australians into the sport.
I know that my contribution with the Aboriginal and Indigenous side of our sport will only grow. I'm really excited for that. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to give Indigenous youth and Aboriginal youth around our nation more opportunity to get into the sport, and that's something that we'll work on down the track, but I am excited to spend more time in that space.
Well, that is all the sport for now. Back to you, Yalda.
Louisa, thank you so much. Now, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine exactly 4 weeks ago, all eyes were on the capital, Kiev, as Russian forces advanced from all directions. But the Russian army had other objectives too, and taking the southern port city of Mariupol was high among them. If they could do this, they would be able to join up Russian-held Crimea with the Russian-held areas of eastern Ukraine and create a land corridor to Russia itself. Around 100,000 people are believed to be trapped there with supplies running out and aid blocked from entering. Residents have endured weeks of Russian bombardment with no power or running water. Well, last Wednesday, hundreds of civilians, mostly women and children, were sheltering in the city's main drama theatre when the building took a direct hit from a Russian airstrike. Within seconds, the theatre had split in 2 and was left in ruins. Well, earlier I spoke with Igor Mostovoy, an opera singer from Mariupol. He used to perform at the theatre and spoke with me about his memories there.
I performed many times in the theater when I was a kid as well. So when I just started singing, it was one of the places where I was at first dreaming to be. And then when I went on that stage, it was a feeling of joy, of happiness to be there and to be in one of the main theaters of the city. And the last time I performed there was on the 8th of March of 2021 for the International Women's Day to congratulate our mothers, our sisters, and all of the women of the city. A point of bringing something bright and human became the symbol of inhuman deeds of Russia in Ukraine and in my city.
Yeah, we're just looking at the pictures now of the destroyed theatre. But I just wonder if we can just play a little bit of a clip of you performing at the theatre. We're just listening to it there, but I just want our audiences to hear your voice. I wonder if we...
Thank you.
I think they're lining that up now. Let's have a listen. Incredible voice there, Igor. And you are also were due to perform in many European cities in April. But of course, because of martial law, you can't leave the country now.
Exactly, yes. I'm trying to find an official way to leave the country because these concerts that are organized by my agents in Europe, they're meant to support my country. They're meant to support my city, and all of the money and financial support that I'll be able to get from these concerts are supposed to go towards supporting my country and people in need. And I hope it will be possible for me to go and do this because I find my mission in supporting my country in this way.
Yeah,
and I hope it will be possible.
Igor, we know of the devastation in Mariupol, horrific stories of mass graves, bodies in the streets, no heating, no water, no food, people running out of food. You still have family there. Just tell us about the situation for them.
Exactly. I have my brother there. I just got news that my uncle was evacuated, unfortunately, to the Russian side, but my brother is still there, and we didn't have connection to him for 5 days already. And my stepsister, so this uncle who was evacuated, his daughter, we've lost all kinds of connection with her, and she's lost, and we don't know where she is.
That must be terrifying.
And it's impossible. It is. It keeps us in constant stress and constant shock of everything that is happening. We just hope that she is alive. We hope that my brother is alive, and we've lost all kinds of hope that my grandfather, who also is in Mariupol, and he was already in state that he couldn't walk by himself and he couldn't eat by himself. So we've lost hope that he is alive.
That's Igor Mostovoy, an opera singer from Mariupol who has managed to be evacuated. Now, more than 3.5 million people have now fled Ukraine in the months since the war began, with more than 2 million of them crossing into Poland. Our correspondent Mark Lowen has been there since the first day and sent this report from the border.
It's been a month of lives ripped up, a generation driven out, certainty torn apart. A month that we've been here, seeing the heartbreak of the sick forced to flee, but compassion too of hearts and homes opened, of the democratic world standing up to the aggressor. 4 weeks on, the only change is warmer weather. The arrivals keep coming, seeking safety from a war some don't understand, welcomed where Poland can put them, this a school, a smile for the kids at the ready. Inside, volunteers bring comfort after an exhausting journey. Yulia Kirienko and her sons fled Kiev, her husband staying to fight.
Children were killed and teenage girls were raped. We had to leave. They were shooting at the cars as we tried to escape. We prayed as we drove. It's good here, but we want to go home. I just want this to end.
The trauma on the youngest could take years to show and last a lifetime. Olga Oleshko's little ones already feel it.
They were asking why helicopters were flying, why there were sirens, why people were dying. I had to explain it in a way that didn't hurt them.
At the start of the invasion, we watched as panic prompted the immediate first rush to escape. But these are the people who didn't want to leave, thinking they could stick it out, that the bombs might stop. But they didn't stop, and more than 3.5 million refugees later, there's a growing feeling of the long term about this, with all the challenges that will entail. Destination Warsaw, whose population is up by almost a fifth. New arrivals given ID numbers and school places. They have a journey to safety, but their country still has no passage to peace. Mark Lowen, BBC News, on the Poland-Ukraine border.
Well, while Western military assistance to Ukraine helps sustain the fightback of Ukrainian troops on the ground, humanitarian and medical assistance from the EU countries is helping prop up Ukrainian hospitals. Some of that help reaches Ukraine from Italy via Romania, as Nick Thorpe reports.
Ambulances donated by the Italian government passed through the Romanian border at Siret. Other humanitarian supplies go through Poland and will soon start through Slovakia. 1 month into the war, Ukraine is grateful for every form of support it can get. These boxes contain drugs, bandages, surgical equipment, mobile X-ray machines, even lights for operating theatres.
На Україні сьогодні дуже багато людей, які We have many injured people who immensely need the medical supplies donated by the European Union. We distribute these items to places where we have the most difficult cases in the hospitals, and with these medicines we help people who have suffered from the Russian aggression.
First, the handover.
We hope that very soon we will win and we will all together celebrate our victory.
These trucks have just arrived here from northern Italy, containing medical supplies and equipment donated by the Italian government, coordinated by the European Union. From here, they're being loaded into Ukrainian trucks and taken across the border to the city of Chernivtsi.
For a moment, it could almost be Italy. Less than an hour to the border. The colours of the Ukrainian flag are everywhere. Over the rolling plains, the foothills of the Carpathians. The smoke rising here is just from burning straw. Memories of peacetime. Nick Thorpe, BBC News, Siret on the Romania-Ukraine border.
Now to other stories making headlines. Let's get some other news. The South Korean military says North Korea has fired a suspended long-range ballistic missile. The Japanese Coast Guard said the suspected missile has landed in its waters some 170 kilometers off North Japan. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in has convened a national security meeting in response to the test. North Korea has carried out a record number of weapons tests this year. It has not tested an intercontinental ballistic missile since 2017. Here's how Japan and South Korea reacted.
The government strongly condemned the launch as it is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions and a reversal of the moratorium on intercontinental ballistic missile launches, which North Korea had promised to the international community.
It is estimated to have flown 1,100 kilometres at an altitude of over 6,000 kilometres. The launch is a serious threat to Japan's security. North Korea launched the missile without any warning, and it landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone.
South Korea has responded by test firing its own missiles. None of them were aimed at North Korea. Laura Bicker, BBC Seoul correspondent, has more.
This was a big missile. It flew for more than an hour and landed just 170 kilometres from Japan's coastline. Officials in Tokyo say that this is a new type of intercontinental ballistic missile. If true, then that will mean that this is the first time since November 2017 that North Korea has fired such a weapon. South Korean military have said in the last few hours that it fired 5 missiles in response. They came from the air, the sea and the ground. Again, the first time that has happened since 2017. This feels like a major escalation on the Korean peninsula. Back in 2017, when we had fire and fury, it led to talks between Donald Trump, the then US president, and the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. At that time, Kim Jong-un promised not to test these long-range weapons. The reason that analysts really kind of wonder about these weapons is the fact that they could have the potential to reach the United States. And that is why so many people are currently concerned. The world's attention has been elsewhere, and the Biden administration has made it clear that North Korea is not their priority, although they have said that they are willing to meet with officials from North Korea at any time, although they're not willing to give any more concessions. Pyongyang is proving once again, after 12 missile tests in this year alone, and now this potential intercontinental ballistic missile, that it is capable of producing new weapons, capable of going further and faster, even though it's under strict economic sanctions.
Laura Bicker reporting there from Seoul. Now, a senior British judge has concluded that the ruler of Dubai inflicted exorbitant domestic abuse on his ex-wife, Princess Haya. Sir Andrew McFarlane said that 72-year-old Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum consistently displayed coercive and controlling behaviour with respect to those members of his family who he regards as behaving contrary to his will. Princess Haya will now have sole responsibility for their 2 children. His ruling marks the end of a 3-year custody battle at the High Court in London. Now, Prince William has expressed profound sorrow at abhorrent slavery in a speech to dignitaries during his visit to Jamaica. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are currently on the 2nd leg of their tour of the Caribbean in honour of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Our royal correspondent Johnny Diamond reports from Kingston, and just a warning, his report contains flash photography.
In swept the couple for dinner with the great and the good of Jamaica. Ever since this trip was announced, a question hung over it. How would William address the issue of slavery, the brutal exploitation of hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans when Jamaica was run by Britain?
I strongly agree with my father, the Prince of Wales, who said in Barbados last year that the appalling atrocity of slavery forever stains our history. I want to express my profound sorrow. Slavery was abhorrent, and it should never have happened.
This has been quite a political part of the Caribbean tour, because earlier the Jamaican Prime Minister made very clear to the couple in front of the cameras that he wanted an end to the role of the Queen as the head of state here and to the constitutional link to Britain.
Jamaica is, as you would see, a country that is very proud of our history, very proud of what we have achieved, and we are moving on. And we intend to attain in short order our development goals and fulfill our true ambitions. Independent, developed, prosperous country.
William tried to answer some of the questions about Britain's past in Jamaica with his speech. Less clear is what the royal family's future, if any, is in a truly independent Jamaica. Johnny Diamond, BBC News, Kingston.
Let's get more news now from Ukraine, because both Russia and Ukraine produce a third of the world's wheat and barley exports, which feed millions of people in the Middle East, Asia and Africa. Well, earlier I spoke to UN Assistant Secretary General Milyana Spolyarich-Egger about the long-term implications on the conflict on wheat production.
The long-term implications will be that we will have to do everything as of today to join forces with the humanitarians to preserve the functioning and the production lines coming out of Ukraine. So what we have to do as of today, we have to look at the development gain, and we have to work with the government so to ensure that the Ukraine economy continues to subsist and continues to function for the people of Ukraine, but also for other regions in the world. So our investments go to working with the local municipalities in sustaining the provision of public services, in sustaining agriculture, and the people are willing to do that and are willing to work together.
Is that even possible in a place like Mariupol or Kherson or Kharkiv?
It is not possible in Mariupol, of course, and this will depend on emergency assistance. But there are large parts in the country, including in the West, that we have to preserve economically and will have to use to kickstart the economy again as quickly as possible when we can achieve a hard environment.
Miliana, I'm just going to play this clip because you, of course, have been elected as the next president of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And the current president, Peter Mora, who has been in Moscow today, has said the following. He met with Foreign Minister Lavrov at a press conference, and this is what he had to say. Just have a listen.
I'm certainly committed with the ICRC to have as objective as possible and as fact and evidence-based as possible decisions. We know that this is always a challenge and the difficulties in conflict. I do respect also that after my visit in Kiev and here, there are always different interpretations of international law.
That's Peter Mora. You heard there that clip. I mean, he's talking about the different interpretations of international law, but the targeting of maternity hospitals in Mariupol, of theatres where we know that women and children are seeking shelter, is that open to interpretation?
The targeting of hospitals and civilian infrastructure is not open to interpretation. It creates senseless suffering, and it is a direct attack on the livelihood and the economic basis of a country, which we have to prevent.
So, if you were meeting with Sergei Lavrov in your, in your next position as president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, you would vehemently disagree with Peter Mora.
I don't think I will ever disagree with Peter Mora, because neither Peter nor I will ever seek for justification for attacks on civilian infrastructure, especially hospitals and schools.
So when he says, though, that it's different interpretations of international law, what do you think he's referring to?
The international law can be interpreted differently by other parties, but it is clear in the sense of not allowing attacks on civilian infrastructure.
That was Mariana Egger, the Deputy UN Secretary-General, speaking to me there a little earlier. Let's just take you to the NATO summit in Brussels, where German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is currently speaking to the press. He has continued to discuss the conflict in Ukraine, and he says that we call on the Russian president to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine and establish a humanitarian corridors in some of the worst affected areas like Mariupol. He's also said that we are more united in this difficult situation than ever before, and he also spoke about the situation with refugees, saying we are obliged to take those people who are fleeing the country. Matthew will be back with all the latest headlines on Ukraine and other news. Goodbye for now.
Hello there. Let's take a look at some of the bigger weather stories going on across the globe. Starting with North America, we've had this troublesome front which has brought tornadic thunderstorms to parts of the deep south over the last couple of days. That is slipping its way southwards and eastwards all the while. Still be a bit of a hang back though across the eastern seaboard, certainly down Georgia into Florida on Thursday. Some heavy rainfall here, snow on its northern edge with some cold air across central and eastern Canada, and there'll be further snow through central Canada there. This cold air will be diving southwards and eastwards into much of the eastern United States as we head on into the weekend. But it's a different story across the west, particularly the southwest here. We're looking at temperatures well above the seasonal norm. Some even record challenging late March heat expected there over the next few days. So that weather front will be pushing into southern Mexico and parts of the Caribbean Thursday and Friday. So some heavy showers here. That will clear away, so we should see an improvement during the course of the weekend. Very heavy rainfall has been affecting the southeast corner of South America. We've had reports of flooding in Paraguay. This vigorous flow will slowly clear away from the northeast of Argentina on Thursday, taking the heavy rain and the gales with it. It also stays very wet across Iberia, southern eastern Spain, seeing further heavy flooding rainfall on Friday. Slow improvement across the southeast. We're looking at temperatures getting closer back to the seasonal norm across Greece and the islands. High pressure dominates the scene, though, across much of Central and Northern Europe. Lots of sunshine here. So it's cool and wetter than average across the northwest of Africa, thanks to that area of low pressure. Cooler as well for Libya and for Egypt. Plenty of downpours across the southern quarter of the continent and into Madagascar. This area of low pressure bringing further cool weather into the Levant, across into the Caucasus. Some heavy rainfall there, mountain snow, but the rest of the Middle East for Friday will be dry with a good deal of sunshine around temperatures around the seasonal norm. Much of South Asia is dry as well to end the week. Still that risk of some heavy showers across the south and the west, certainly around the Western Ghats. Those temperatures creeping close to the 40 Celsius mark, though, across central and northern India. Looks pretty unsettled, though, to end the week across southern and eastern China. This intense area of low pressure will be pushing its way eastwards, bringing a spell of gales as well, that pushing into the Korean Peninsula and southern Japan as we head into the start of the weekend. So some very wet weather there for a while through Friday, but it will be quite warm. That air coming in from the south, so quite warm and humid. Indochina will be largely dry with some sunshine, but there will be some intense downpours around. We've got the usual mixture of sunshine and afternoon downpours across Indonesia and Malaysia. Finally, for Australasia, well, some heavy downpours across Australia's northern territory. Dry, sunny and hot across the west. Fortunately, we're looking at more showers and heavy rain pushing into New South Wales and southern Queensland, areas that really don't need any more rainfall. So it looks quite wet here through Friday and the weekend, and a slow improvement across New Zealand's North Island.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Europe, the Taliban, China. There is an awful lot to consider. Let's take this stage by stage. Here's the BBC Stephen McDonald in Beijing. So help me understand the politics of this. Let's look at some of the international reactions. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? Next, we have to step back and let's just remind ourselves this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ross Atkins. Outside Source on BBC World News.
This is BBC News. I'm Matthew Amreliwala. 1 month on from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Another setback for Moscow as the Ukrainian Navy destroys a landing ship west of Mariupol. Ukraine accuses Russian forces of forcibly deporting 15,000 residents of Mariupol to Russia from the districts they've captured.
And I'm Lise Doucette in Kyiv, where President Zelensky speaks of a month of heroic resistance and a month of dark suffering.
NATO leaders approve plans to send 40,000 extra troops to their eastern border. They call it the biggest security have now fled Ukraine, with more than 2 million crossing into Poland.
Get it down!
In other news here in Britain, a jury at the Old Bailey has shown footage of the moment the man accused of murdering the MP, Sir David Amess, was tackled by police. He denies murder. And the boss of P&O Ferries has admitted breaking the law by sacking 800 workers without consulting the unions. Hello and welcome to BBC News. It is exactly a month since Russian troops invaded Ukraine. Since then, thousands of civilians, Ukrainian soldiers and Russian troops have been killed. Some cities like Mariupol have faced a relentless Russian bombardment and suffered almost complete destruction. President Zelensky has called it a terrible, dark month of destruction and urged people around the world to come out and protest against the invasion. President Putin has never called it a war, but rather a special operation to demilitarise his neighbour. Well, in Brussels, it is a day of crucial diplomacy. President Biden has joined Western leaders with a flurry of meetings of NATO, the G7 and EU Council. And in the last few moments, the G7 leaders have warned Russia not to use biological or chemical weapons in Ukraine. Well, we're live with our correspondent Lise Doucet in Kyiv, also in a moment Jessica Parker in Brussels. But let's head to Kyiv, the capital, and to Lise. And Lise, you said on the first day of this war, it felt like everything was turned upside down, inside out. We're now a month in. What are your reflections?
Every life in this country, and indeed far beyond, has been upended by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It has been a month like no other for this country and for countries beyond its borders. President Zelensky has described it as a month of heroic resistance, but also of dark suffering. How can we forget that a month ago at this time, there was dread that it was just a matter of time, even possibly a matter of days, before Russian forces already heading here from the Belarusian border would be in the capital within days. And an airport just west of here, Hostomel Airport, had already been attacked and captured by Russian forces. And where is Ukraine now? Well, that Hostomel airport is still contested, and Russia still hasn't seized a major city, a city of symbolic and strategic value. And not only are the Ukrainians holding ground, they're also going on the offensive. They've taken back Kharkiv, right on the border with the capital Kyiv. They're also taking back territory in the south. But Russia continues to attack. Look at Mariupol, now described as hell on earth, and it's not the only place. So 1 month on, this is still a place where Russia continues its offensive, and the Ukrainians continue their attacks too. Let's look at all the latest developments with this report from Celestina Olulude.
Pictures from a Ukrainian source appearing to show a strike on a Russian naval ship in the occupied port of Berdyansk. Plumes of smoke are seen billowing from the large vessel. If confirmed, this would be a setback to Russia's attempts to create a land bridge in the southeast of Ukraine. Seen here 3 days ago, the ship was capable of carrying up to 1,500 tons of military equipment. The attack took place 80 kilometres from the besieged port city of Mariupol. Once vibrant, these are the scars of a month of war. Russian bombardment leaving ruins and rubble throughout. Standing defiant, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, last night, unusually in English, urged people worldwide to show their support for Ukraine.
This is only the beginning for Russia on the Ukrainian land. Show your standing. Come from your offices, your homes, your schools and universities. Come in the name of peace. Come with Ukrainian symbols to support Ukraine, to support freedom, to support life. Come to your squares, your streets. Make yourselves visible and heard. Say that people matter, freedom matters, peace matters, Ukraine matters.
A significant amount of strategic territory has been taken by Russia, but the capital Kyiv remains in Ukrainian hands, with troops taking back some surrounding areas. Britain will provide 6,000 missiles and £25 million to support the Ukrainian army. But as the war continues into a second month, Ukraine's demands for a no-fly zone are yet to be met. Celestina Olulude, BBC News.
And so another day where President Zelensky has been expressing gratitude for all of the military, humanitarian, political, every kind of support being offered by his neighbours and from many capitals beyond. But another day where he says it's simply not enough. Not enough for a war which still grinds on, a war of attrition. It's now being called, with such a deep sense of foreboding that as bad as it has been, the worst could still be to come.
Lise, we've heard very little in this last week of anything surrounding peace talks. What's your reading of that?
Yes, it's very interesting that almost as soon as this invasion started, the discussions started between Ukrainian and Russian negotiators. And we have been hearing all along that they have been making progress, not just by the negotiating teams, but also by the many mediators who are very keen to be able to say that they are the ones who got President Zelensky and President Putin together to end this war of our time. But I think now, 1 month on, there is a recognition that while some progress has been made, the talks are described as more realistic. President Putin apparently doesn't call again for that horrible word, decapitating the Ukrainian government, the removal of President Zelensky and his team. He doesn't call for the removal of the Ukrainian military. And similarly, Ukraine has understood that it's not going to join NATO anytime soon, if at all. But the issues of territory, of what Russia still wants and wants to keep, remain the most contentious issues of all. The mediators say President Putin will meet President Zelensky when the time is right. But 1 month on, it does seem the time isn't right yet.
Lisa, you were talking about President Zelensky. He has called for protest around the world to mark this 1 month moment. But in terms of help, he's been very specific in what he wants from all those meetings going on in Brussels, and particularly around weapons.
Yes, he's always very clever in his choice of words. Either he or his staff does the research. Every time he addresses a foreign parliament, he touches on the history of the country in question, draws on their most evocative moments, and then asks them to think about Ukraine. Today, in addressing the NATO military alliance, he looked carefully at what kind of weaponry they had, and he said, just give us 1% of your combat aircraft, 1% of your tanks. He said, give us 500 tanks. You've got some 20,000. And so you can see the faces of the NATO leaders sitting there and knowing that, of course, Ukraine is fighting a war for them on their borders, and NATO saying time and again that they will not go beyond the borders of NATO members' territory. But there has been a consistent support and a supply. We don't know all the details. We weren't privy to the discussions today. Jens Stoltenberg said they couldn't reveal, but they are talking about air defense systems, while saying no to a no-fly zone. They are talking about continuing that supply of weapons, and no doubt President Putin and his officers have a close eye on those supply links as well, those supply lines, knowing full well that they are the key to the Ukrainian resistance on the ground and in the air.
Lisa Doucette live there in Kyiv. Thanks very much for the latest, and Lisa taking us to exactly where we're going next, because the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said that Vladimir Putin made a big mistake by invading Ukraine and has underestimated the strength and bravery of the Ukrainian people. President Biden has joined Boris Johnson and other NATO leaders in Brussels for an emergency summit today to try to find solutions. Well, here's NATO Secretary General laying out further support that the alliance will provide to Ukraine.
On land, we will have substantially more forces in the east groups, submarines, and significant numbers of combat ships on a persistent basis.